When does well, if you're coming into this formation and you're starting to put things together that clearly aren't taught anymore, like are you going crazy looking at some of this stuff and saying what, like just watching how the Catholic faith is actually taught in current society versus what you're learning, like how did you handle that as you're figuring that stuff out?
Well, I'll admit I went through kind of phases where you just get really irritated by a lot of stuff, and um, even in the church, when there's just a basic lack of common sense in a lot of ways, just in not just in the way they talk and in things like that. So, but at a certain point, I in the studies of Saint John of the Cross that I did, and seeing how that kind of lines out with the Thomistic psychology, because John of the Cross openly says he's Thomistic in his foundation. I saw how all that stuff kind of interacted, and one of the things I really connected with was St. Thomas's discussion on the passions or emotions. And then he talks about how all the passions arise out of all the other emotions arise out of the emotion of love. And so basically the reason you have anger is because something that you love is being impacted or something like that. So, and what St. John of the Cross comes along later and says, this is just an attachment, right? So I started going back to, again, it's the mechanics thing. Okay, I'm seeing this is the effect I'm seeing. What's the actual cause in the machinery? So then I started looking at just realizing, well, if that's the case, then anytime I'm getting angry, it means that there's something I love, which is another name for an attachment. There's something I'm attached to. And so I have to start detaching from that. So even though I do, do a lot of preaching and stuff like that in regard to the state of the church and things like that, I just realized I had to be detached even from the state of the church, that in the end, the only thing that we can ultimately have an attachment to is God. Everything else, you have to be detached. You have to fight for it. It's like with our country. You have to fight your best for it, put everything you can in to make it the best country possible. Same with the church. But in the end, you have to be able to be completely detached from it. My dissertation director, actually, when I was writing my dissertation, he said, writing a dissertation is a funny thing because you have to pour yourself entirely into the thing. But you also have to be detached enough to be able to walk completely away from it. And that was a formulation of something that I'd actually had learned. And I think that there was some level of that detachment, even in relationship to my, just growing up into my father and my mom, is just learning, if you're going to do the right thing, a lot of times you just got to put aside how you feel and just do the right thing.
I want to go back to the detachment from the situation in the church a little bit, because I kind of think we have in the church today, you have people who kind of fall dogmatically into their positions. And whether that's Francis is not the Pope, or Benedict didn't resign, or it's, Francis is, it's like all these different dogmatic positions, and they all seem to lean toward the trad camp. A lot of them do love the Latin Mass. Then, I kind of take the position where I don't know, and I don't really care because it's not in my ability to change anything. Like, what can trads do to avoid falling into these dogmatic positions where they think anybody that attends this liturgy is, part of us? It's just kind of crazy in the trad world, and I don't know how to navigate it at times.
Well, there's certain theological questions that are extraordinarily complicated. So for me, it's analogous to an engine, right? If I open up the hood of a car and I just see wires and hoses and all sorts of stuff I don't even, parts that I don't even know what they actually work on, but I'm going to start making declarations like, hey, I think if we take this off, this will work. You're going to end up with something that doesn't run, right? Well, if you take that same analogy in relationship to theology, I notice a lot of the people that are weighing in, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, that are weighing in this stuff, they've never studied the authors and the historical authors in this area. And in order to do that, you have to know Latin. You have to be able to have a certain level of proficiency in philosophy and theology, because some of the distinctions are extraordinarily fine, but they're very clear. They're clear if you know the philosophy and you know the theology. But these people are just barging in and saying stuff, and it's becoming a mess. I was just talking to some of the priests here yesterday. I said, I find it fascinating that you get these guys that are willing to wax quasi eloquently, or so they think, on some theological topic that literally could impact their salvation, and yet they're going to proceed on speculation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just nutty to me. So you know, when it comes to theology, there's certain areas I just avoid, even though I do know some of the basic arguments. I haven't studied, I haven't spent the time to study that specific topic in depth throughout the course of the historical discussion of it. And by the way, a lot of these things were areas where theologians legitimately debated, right? And so you can't, people will just pick one thing and say, that's it, this is what it is. And it's just because it fits them emotionally, right? It's their attachment. They just don't want to, you know, like, they just don't want to entertain the idea that the guy in white could say something ridiculous, right? They just don't want to entertain that. And so they just launch off into some conclusion that doesn't necessarily follow because of their emotional baggage. And so, and that's I think one of the real advantages of having grown up under my father is, you know, I mentioned that in one of those, is that you have to put your emotions aside, how you feel, so that you can actually study this thing and know it properly. And in this case, it was to fix this thing, because what you think does not necessarily line out with the reality. And that's what I'm finding a lot with some of these people is that they're barging into areas and they don't even know the reality of what the tradition even was in the area. So that's the problem. And so, because I don't know it, I just kind of be detached from it. Part of it is too, is my basic attitude is, I'm just going to live my Catholic life. I'm going to try and become holy and let God sort that other stuff out.
Yeah, I think especially today, everybody thinks the church is and it is, don't get me wrong, the church is a mess, but there is an aspect of it where we're not being persecuted. Nobody's stopping you from becoming holy.
Right.
You have access to the sacraments. There's no government trying to, you know, it's not like we have priests in foxholes or whatever, you know, priest holes and things like that. So, I mean, when I see people take certain positions, especially like the sedevacantist position, and they're going into like the theories of like, well, this guy was a Freemason, and it's like, I don't know. I think it's a dangerous thing to put forth a proposition where the outcome could lead to, you know, being separated from the church. Like I just wouldn't. I mean, look, I'm a construction worker, so I just would never feel okay putting that kind of weight behind something I said, where somebody would leave the church or go to some chapel because of something I said. It's a thing that scares me.
Yeah, that's true, because it's not that they're not only jeopardizing their own possible salvation, they're jeopardizing other people's, and they're going to be responsible for it.